Thank you so much. So the talk I want to give today is... Hello, hello. So the talk I want to give today is taken from a book manuscript entitled Conversion in the Shadow of Catastrophe. And the work is a collective biography of German Jewish converts to Christianity who narrated the spiritual and confessional transformation, their spiritual and confessional transformations against the backdrop of the Holocaust and its aftermath. The work tackles the fraught relationship between religion, politics, and Holocaust memory from an autobiographical perspective, and it tries to show how these texts fuse the memory of historical trauma with spiritual illumination, and it asks what happens when you turn the story of your survival into a conversion narrative. And so what kinds of self-understanding does the choice of genre enable or alternatively obstruct? And to what degree is the literary paradigm of Christian conversion, with its emphasis on the individual's complete detachment from a former sinful self, an appropriate vehicle for the articulation of what was essentially a collective catastrophe that befell the very community that the convert now seeks to place at a distance? And so these are some of the converts that I'm looking at in this work. Carl Stern, who is a psychiatrist who resettles in Montreal in the 1940s. Heinrich Kronstein, who is a legal scholar who escapes to the United States in 1935, and I think he becomes the dean of the law school at Georgetown University. Karl Jakob Hirsch, who's the great-grandson of Rabbi Samson Raphael Hirsch, the author of Walter Zafon, and one of the person who essentially founds modern orthodoxy. Edith Stein, she's kind of an outlier in the sense that she converts before the war and doesn't survive it. But I think that some of the trends that I point out in these other figures also correspond to the autobiographical fragments that she left us. And then Alfred Döblin, who is famous expressionist writer, whose narrative, who I hope I eventually get to today, Schicksalreise, which appeared in 1949, is essentially the story of his war years, and which he tells from the point of view of a Catholic convert who's seen the light during that time. And this Ernst Joseph Alfred, who plays a smaller role in the story, is he's involved in staging the Threepenny Opera, and he escapes to the States during the war and comes back after the Holocaust, and he too is a convert. I think he's also a Catholic convert. The thing is, he doesn't play such a central role in the story because conversion is not the main focal point of the narrative. It's there, but the four characters that I focus on in particular are the ones that tell their Holocaust stories as conversion narratives. And so the lives of the converts at the center of this study were marked by experiences of radical dislocation, disruption, and distress. And Christianity provides them with a framework with which to reestablish a stable sense of self and meaning in the face of total despair. In these narratives, the suffering and displacement, exile and persecution found its justification when the emigres managed to uncover the deep structures of meaning underlying their experiences. And so their autobiographies employ conversion as a master trope that serves to restructure a life riven by political upheaval and historical catastrophe. It incorporates the disruption of the war years within an intelligible and developmental narrative, bringing together the biographical discontinuities of the years 1933 to 1945. And so, to the extent that the symbolic resources of the Christian conversion narrative facilitate the convert's reconstituted selfhood, I argue that this task is achieved at the cost of obscuring and excluding certain aspects of individual experience that do not conform to the preordained models of the Christian conversion narrative, and that these lacunae, or gaps, leave textual traces in their stories. And what I'm arguing is essentially for the inadequacy of form, which essentially it fails to serve as a repository for sentiments of rage and resentment, and that these sort of gaps leave other traces in the text. And so what I'm saying is essentially that, these stories, they tell a story of like rebirth and regeneration through their discovery of Christ and Christianity. But at the same time, there are other ways of reading these stories as these narratives of failure and of breakdown and bereavement. And so in the case of Alfred Döblin, for example, I think there's two very central moments in the text where he talks about how he's addressing these big audiences. And one of them is a very famous, it reappears in all of the biographies about Döblin. And one is like they're celebrating his 65th birthday in Santa Monica. And, all these Döblin, these great exiles, are there to celebrate his birthday with him. And he gives this talk, which is, he's just like religious pontification about how, only a God can save us, and that this is how we need to fight fascism. And, this sort of secular-leaning left-wing audience is just shocked. And this is like, you see this in the memoirs of many of the people that came to join the Simcha. And he realizes this strikes everyone as inappropriate. And that comes up in Schicksalreise as well, where like this is sort of a mise en abîme moment where his address to the audience is encountered with miscomprehension. And the narrative also ends with one of these moments where he's back in Germany, in Berlin. And everyone, again, it's the story of everyone being shocked by, the persona that he's presenting to the audience, this like religiously devout individual. And I think this is very telling about like this inability to translate your new religious conviction to your audiences. And so I think that I'm going to just like skip ahead here. So maybe one way to clarify the stakes of this talk is to go back to these, I guess like the two paradigmatic figures of conversion, which are St. Paul and St. Augustine. And in these figures, in these stories, what we see is in St. Paul's case, the conversion occurs through some kind of supernatural event. He's struck down by divine light and is addressed by Jesus. Following this transformation, Paul turns away from his old life as a Pharisee and a persecutor of the early Christian community to become a follower of this new religious sect. And the mystical revelation on the road to Damascus transforms Saul into Paul, turning the heresy into a Christian. And something similar happens to St. Augustine in the 8th book of the Confessions, where he's addressed by an angelic voice of God that urges him to pick up and read the Bible. And in both of these stories, conversion is this kind of unmediated experience of spiritual illumination. And I think that this kind of like emphasis on the individualistic, transformative aspect of conversion, it carries on in a lot of texts that we see today and that talk about it. One of the classic, it's 100 years old, but I think that it captures the way we usually think of conversion today, which is William James and the Varieties of Religious Experience, where he writes, to be converted, to be regenerated, to receive grace, to experience religion, to gain an assurance are so many phrases which denote the process, gradual or sudden, by which itself, hitherto divided and consciously wrong, inferior, and unhappy, becomes unified and consciously right, superior and happy, in consequence of its firmer hold upon religious realities. And so in James's picture here, conversion is an experience that defines, it is a defining moment in a life. Everything is divided into a before and an after, and everything before is leading up to this moment, and everything after is a consequence of this moment. And so while the Jamesian model suggests that conversion constitutes a subjective experience of total, all-encompassing change, the Jewish converts that I'm looking at, and Döblin is one of them, they reveal that conversion is a much more ambiguous phenomenon. So that contrary to the Jamesian archetype, Döblin and these other figures, they never experienced that full rebirth because they never managed to completely shed their ancestral and social pasts as Jews. But more importantly, the challenges that they confront, both before and after their conversion, reflect the fact that conversion is never a purely individual act, but one that is deeply embedded in larger social, political, and cultural, in a larger social, political, and cultural context. And so this larger framework seems to be missed in the Jamesian narrative. And I think that it's also missed in the conversion narratives that I'm looking at, where they're trying to assert a certain kind of selfhood that tries to pretend that this cultural baggage concerning Jewish conversion just doesn't exist, and that their attempt to reincorporate themselves into, in some of these cases, post-war German society will be a seamless process. So I'm going to skip this quote, and here's one moment and just like quickly look at some of the Döblin examples, where Döblin is trying to justify himself to a friend who essentially was bankrolling the family when they were in California, and he writes her, "Dear Frau Rosen, you spoke of betrayal. This is wrong. It is wrong. Religion is a private matter. As for myself, following my reading of Kierkegaard, I have been preoccupied with Christian mysticism and philosophy for the past 2 to 3 years. Were I to share my Christian attitude in public, one might speak of betrayal. Did I do that? Not to the best of my knowledge. I have always held the same conception of Jewishness, mainly that we are a people in full dissolution. If I were to become Catholic or Protestant today or tomorrow, which is not the case at all, why should I not be allowed to, as long as it remains in my bosom?" So the interesting thing is that he's writing this after, the gossip around his conversion in California already began to spread. And he's saying, oh, this is just something that I'm keeping to myself. But he later wrote a memoir in 1949, which tells the story of his turn to Catholicism. And he did not keep this in his bosom. And the argument I'm trying to make in this chapter, which I guess I'm not going to get too far into, is that that this is a kind of bridge that he's trying to build towards the German public, and find this kind of common grounds as as a German exile, not a German Jewish exile, but just as a German exile who's found Christ in during the war years, and it's something about the struggles that he faced led him to Christianity. And so it ends in the Schicksalreise, on the one hand, it tries to give you this kind of redemptive arc to the Holocaust, and to the fact that this person has lost his family during the war. One of his sons was killed in battle when he was fighting for the French army in 1940 or 1939, and so the audiences or the public that Döblin does identify with in Schicksalreise is actually the Germans, and I'm just going to quickly. Okay, here. I'm going to end with this quote because I think it's very telling. Is I read Jeremiah's lamentations on the city's destruction, and this is in reference to Berlin, post-war Berlin. The old prophet is grieving only for one city, though a particularly richly populated one that is holy to him. And so here, this is the Book of Lamentations, Sefer Echa. He's referring to it in order to describe the destruction of Berlin, as if it were some sort of hand of God that caused this destruction, and not, the rise of Nazism. And this is one of the problems that also exists here when you try to, recount the story of the war as a kind of a theological event. So I'm going to leave you with this, and thank you very much for your attention.